Good morning and welcome to our Bible study for this week. It is Wednesday, February 10th. I am recording this on Wednesday morning, fresh from a doctor's appointment. You may have heard I had a little accident, got a little fingers too close to the table saw blade. Kind of weird here on the with the background, but you can see I got the fingers taped up. The doctor looked at them this morning. Everything looks great. Get the stitches out in a week. Should be all healed up and good to go by then. Really, as we hear so often, not as bad as it could be. So thanks for the prayers, the concerns that I've heard from folks in the congregation. And again, I expect to be healed up pretty well in a week or so. Really not much pain. More of an inconvenience than anything else, and feel kind of foolish for being the guy who thought he didn't need the guard on his table saw. With that, we'll begin our Bible study this week. We are looking at Mark 9, verses 2 through 9. If you'd like to get your Bible ready and look that up while I make some announcements here. It is Transfiguration Sunday, Sunday that we celebrate every year. Kind of marks the transition from Epiphany into Lent, is sort of the high point of Mark's gospel. And we'll talk about that a little bit as we get a little closer and get more into the Bible study this morning. So again, that's Mark 9, 2 through 9, if you would like to look that up. A couple announcements. I already told you my hand is healing well. Our task force met on last evening, in fact, February 9th, and we have decided, and again, you know, the decisions are not easy. They take a lot of discussion, a lot of thought, a lot of input from the folks on the committee. We have decided to return to in-person worship with the same restrictions as we had before. So that will be every other pew, have to wear masks, maintain a 6-foot distance whenever possible. We will return to that type of worship on March 7th. So that will be the first Sunday in March. That will be the second Sunday, I believe, maybe the third Sunday of Lent. Yes, that will be the third Sunday of Lent. The first Sunday in March, we come back to in-person worship. We're still having some considerations about Easter. We know that Easter is a day that we want to have some type of worship, hopefully able to get together somehow. But again, we'll work out details on that. I don't think it will be our regular shoulder-to-shoulder Easter Sunday worship yet by that point, but we will have a meaningful worship experience ready for you by Easter Sunday. Ash Wednesday, a week from today, February 17th, we will not be worshiping in person in the church. We will have a recorded worship service that you will be able to participate in at your convenience. That service will be available. We have ashes available that can be delivered to your home, or you can pick them up here at the church. Actually, a little kit that you can use and for the family to impose ashes on one another, or if you're home by yourself, you can place the ashes on your own forehead. There is prayer and some other things that go with that in a little kit. If you are interested in that, please call the church, let us know, and we'll see that you either get to pick those up or we will see that you get them one way or another. But if you would rather be a part of a group, though not a touchy-feely, not a high contact group, we will have a drive-through imposition of ashes here in the church parking lot. We will do that from noon to 1 next Wednesday, and also from 6 to 7 p.m. next Wednesday. We will ask that you enter the church parking lot from the Londonderry Road entrance up in front of the church, proceed down past the front of the main entrance and down alongside of the church and exit onto Arlington Avenue. We'll have some folks here to direct traffic. Again, that will be at noon, from noon to 1, and then in the evening from 6 to 7, a drive-through imposition of ashes. So you're welcome to do that as well. Again, I ask that you please share these Bible studies, worship services. Again, it is, I've come to call it one-touch evangelism. You hit the share button, you hit the forward button in your email, and we're able to share the gospel with folks, anybody on our mailing list, anybody who are on our friends group or other places on Facebook or email. So please do that, and we can spread the word quite easily, quite quickly doing that. So getting to our Bible study for today. Again, we are looking at Mark 9, verses 2 through 9, and this is the transfiguration of Jesus. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and John and led them up a high mountain apart by themselves. And he was transfigured before them. And his clothes became dazzling white, such as no one on earth could bleach them. And there appeared to them Elijah with Moses, who were talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Rabbi, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." He did not know what to say, for they were terrified. Then a cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud there came a voice. "This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him." Suddenly, when they looked around, they saw no one with them anymore, but only Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, he ordered them to tell no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. The Gospel of the Lord. Let me just grab Bible off my shelf here. I'm not out in the church, though it may seem that way. This again is a Zoom background. I am in my office, so my books and things are quite handy here for me to grab. So we have this story of the Transfiguration. Again, a story that probably many of us are familiar with, a story, an event that we celebrate every year in the church. And, if you are one of the regulars here or just happen to have been here during those times when we mark the transition from Epiphany into Lent, you will be familiar with this story of the transfiguration of Jesus. Interesting, we need to look, I think, first of all, at just what transfiguration means. And why is this story called a transfiguration of Jesus? Transfiguration, one dictionary definition, means a complete change of form or appearance into a more beautiful or spiritual state. And so as we hear the description here of how Jesus' clothing changed, how his appearance changed, we can see why that word transfigured is used. It is actually the Greek word that also is one for metamorphosis, as we talk about caterpillars that morph into butterflies, and this idea of metamorphosis, a change in appearance, a change, with the butterflies, an actual change in substance of what they become. And so Jesus changes from his human form, which the disciples had been familiar with up to that point. He changes from that human form and is transfigured into this beautiful or more spiritual state. I think that's a great way to describe it. He becomes dazzling white. It's almost as if he is unreal. But it's not an apparition. It's not a ghost. It is still the real Jesus, but in this transfigured form. It made me think of, a long time ago, if you remember the Pogo cartoons, there was a word there used that I was really impressed with: transmogrification. And transformation always, or transfiguration, always reminds me of transmogrification. And so it is a real word, and it means to transform in a surprising or magical manner. And so Jesus, we could also say, was transmogrified, if we want to use that kind of language. He changed in a surprising manner. He changed right before the disciples' eyes. His whole appearance changed. And so again, the transfiguration, the transmogrification, this changing of Jesus from his human form to a more divine form, and then back again. Our reading begins by saying 6 days later, and this is 6 days after Jesus had made the prediction that this generation would not pass away until they saw, let's see. Yeah, until they saw the coming of the Son of Man, until they saw these things take place. And so it's 6 days after that prediction. So many scholars believe that this was the fulfillment of that prediction. As Jesus predicted the seeing of the Messiah, the coming of the Messiah, that some who were with him at that point would not pass away until they saw this. Well, now Peter, James, and John are witnessing exactly what Jesus had talked about. So this could, in fact, be the fulfillment of what Jesus had to say, or perhaps an allusion or a foretaste or a preview of what is to come. And as a foretaste or a preview, it is also a foreshadowing of the resurrection, as Jesus will rise from the dead, and Peter, James, and John will witness that as well. And some feel that this may even be a resurrection appearance that has been moved to this point in the story of Jesus. But, you know, I kind of believe that as the gospel writers tell the story, it probably happened here not so much as a post-resurrection event, but as a foreshadowing, as a way for Jesus to say, look, I've been telling you about this. This is a chance now to show you what will happen. And so Peter, James, and John, that inner circle of Mark's gospel, are privy to this special appearance. Also, in Exodus, we read of Moses being on the mountain with Jesus for on the mountain of God. I'm sorry, Jesus wasn't there yet with Moses. That Moses was on the mountain of God on Mount Sinai for 6 days. And so we also see here an allusion to Moses, who is one of those who appears to Jesus in this transfiguration event. So we have several allusions here to the Old Testament prophets, to prophecies, things that were promised that are now coming true. Peter, James, and John are the inner circle of Jesus, but they also, like all of us, fall short in their human understanding of Jesus, in their human support of Jesus even. Peter, James, and John were at Gethsemane with Jesus, and if you remember that story, each time Jesus came back from prayer, they had fallen asleep. Jesus asked them to keep watch, and instead they had fallen asleep. And so I think it's a good illustration for us that even those of us who try to be so-called good Christians, those of us who have a strong faith, those of us who attempt to live our lives as Jesus would want us to live, we still fall short because we are human beings. It is human nature. None of us is perfect. And so if even Peter, James, and John are not perfect, neither, of course, are you and I. But this is Again, that inner circle in Mark's gospel, they will be witnesses at the resurrection as well. And so this gives them a sort of a preview of what they will experience when Jesus rises from the dead. Mark tells us that Jesus led them up a high mountain apart. They went away from the other disciples. They went away from the crowds. He doesn't name the mountain, and the name of that mountain really is not important, but the idea of going up a mountain, getting closer to God. Mountaintops are, of course, where theophanies or appearances of God, appearances of the divine take place. Again, we think of Moses going up on Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments. A number of times in the Gospels, Jesus goes up the mountain to pray or to take the disciples. The Sermon on the Mount, of course, takes place on the mountain. So the mountain is a place that signifies being closer to God. And so the exact location of the mountain, the name of that mountain isn't really important. But what is important is we have this picture of Jesus seeking to be closer to God. And, we do that ourselves again in many ways. We seek a closeness with God, not necessarily a geographical closeness, but a spiritual or relational closeness with God. And that's what's represented in this trip up the high mountain. Again, away from the crowds, away from distractions, an opportunity to be close to God for this event to take place. He was transfigured, and this is important because it shows us that Jesus didn't do anything himself. Jesus didn't change himself. The change took place by divine power. It was a divine change that took place in Jesus. It wasn't something that he was able to do. He didn't say any magic words. He didn't drink any magic potion, but he was transformed by the power of God. There are some stories of the resurrection in our Gospels that rather than say Jesus rose from the dead, he was raised from the dead. Again, the divine passive, as that's known, shows the power of God, shows God's hand at work in this. And so Jesus didn't transfigure himself. He was transfigured by the power of God. His clothes again became dazzling white. They had an unearthly or divine nature. Again, we see white as, white clothing, white light as a sign of purity. Jesus had these pure white, like no one could bleach them. I know my wife does a pretty good job of bleaching stains out of my clothes, but according to this, even she wouldn't have been able to bleach anything as bright white as Jesus' clothing became that day. When Moses descended from Mount Sinai in the book of Exodus, his face was so dazzling white that the Israelites couldn't look at him. He had to wear a veil over his face. So again, we see the divine presence being represented here. Some words that are synonyms, perhaps, of this bright whiteness, this dazzling whiteness. He was resplendent, unearthly, dazzling, pure transcendence. One writer describes it as a fleeting perception of the eternal splendor, elusive awareness of the divine presence, a sudden manifestation of the divine. So all these things that are going on here are showing us that God is present. This is God at work. This is God's presence among human beings. This is God present on earth, the power of God changing Jesus, transfiguring Jesus before these three witnesses who what an amazing privilege to be there to witness this transfiguration of Jesus as the very presence of God comes down to that mountaintop and fills Jesus with that dazzling brightness. And then Elijah and Moses appear. And, to know a little bit of our Bible history, Elijah and Moses were both expected to return before the coming of the Messiah. Elijah is in our first reading for this week, taken up into heaven in a chariot. He did not die an earthly death. Moses, by some accounts, did not die an earthly death as well, because we read in scriptures that his grave was never found. Moses, if you recall, was not allowed to enter the promised land because he had angered God whenever he struck the rock and said the words to make water come out. He angered God, and so he was not allowed to enter the promised land with the Israelites. And he died just outside the promised land. But it's said that his grave was never found. And so some believe that he did not die, but he was taken up from that spot to be with God. The book of Malachi promises that a prophet like Moses would come before the Messiah. We have prophecies that Elijah would return before the Messiah. And so Moses and Elijah both make this a very important what I want to say, manifestation of the fulfillment of prophecy, the fulfillment of the coming of the Messiah, that both Moses and Elijah were expected to appear before the Messiah, and here they are with Jesus. And so again, that would be a clue to Peter, James, and John, and those of us reading the story, that Jesus is the Messiah. He is the one who was promised. Peter, of course, gets excited. He calls Jesus rabbi or teacher. It's good for us to be here. Yes, it certainly is. They have witnesses now to what's taking place. Let us make 3 dwellings. This could be a reference to the booths of the Jewish celebration of Sukkoth. We read about in Zechariah 14. But more likely just the idea that because there were 3 appearances there, Jesus, Moses, and Elijah, also 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John. Peter wants to build 3 booths. He wants this experience to last. He doesn't probably realize that Moses and Elijah will be there just for a moment, that they're there to speak to Jesus and then move on. He wants this time to last. He wants to have shelters or dwelling places where they can stay for a while. But of course, that wasn't meant to be. And like us, when we have amazing experiences, what we actually call mountaintop experiences, we want those experiences to last. We don't want them to end, but unfortunately they do. But Peter, of course, is excited, terrified is the word we have here. And I think any of us would be, to be in that kind of a situation where, suddenly Jesus' appearance changes. These prophets of old appear before us. Something like has never happened before, something like we have never experienced before. And suddenly here it is happening right before our eyes. They were rightly terrified. But even as Peter is talking, this cloud overshadows them. The cloud, of course, signifying God's presence. Again, looking at Moses on Mount Sinai, the cloud came down and Jesus presented the 10 commandments from inside the cloud. Or God, I keep saying Jesus, God presented the 10 commandments from inside the cloud. This, as I said, is the high point of Mark's gospel, and it is that way in both sort of literal and figurative fashion. Jesus has been baptized, his ministry has been growing. Now he reaches this mountaintop experience. From here, he goes down to the cross. His worldly experience, his earthly experience will now become one of suffering, one of his journey to the cross. And so again, we stand at that mountaintop with Jesus, looking back at his birth, his epiphany, his revelation to the world. But now we also look forward knowing what is coming. The disciples, of course, didn't know that at that point. We know the whole story. We're standing now on the mountaintop looking back at Jesus' birth and his revelation, looking forward at what we know is going to happen. Jesus now, if you want to say, descending to be crucified. And then, thankfully for us, his resurrection 3 days after his crucifixion. The voice that comes from the cloud, the voice of God, of course, says, "This is my son." At Jesus' baptism, that same voice said, "You are my son," speaking apparently only to Jesus. And now he is revealed again, another sort of epiphany. He is revealed. "This is my son." The voice speaks to Peter, James, and John, all there on the mountaintop. Listen to him. He has authority. Pay attention to what he says. Pay attention to everything he says and everything he has said. Jesus' whole message is one that the disciples need to pay attention to. Suddenly they looked around. No one was with them anymore, but only Jesus. Elijah and Moses have passed the mantle, have passed the torch, have passed the presence of God on to Jesus, the Messiah. From the prophets of old, from the leaders of old, now to Jesus, the Messiah, God doing a new thing in the birth and presence, the incarnation of Jesus. They're more or less telling Jesus, the ministry now is yours. And they have handed that mission and ministry off to Jesus. As they're coming down, Jesus orders them to tell no one. This is the last instance of the messianic secret here in Mark's gospel. That messianic secret, of course, Jesus telling the demons, Jesus telling others not to tell anyone who he is because the time was not right. But here, Jesus tells them when the time will be right, to tell them no one about what they had seen until after the Son of Man had risen from the dead. That will be the right time. So that messianic secret is only for a while. And we, of course, know the whole story. The disciples at this point don't know the whole story. They're probably wondering what Jesus means by rising from the dead. And yet that will be the signal for them to go ahead and tell the story, not only of what they have seen here on the mountaintop, but the whole story of Jesus as Messiah, the gospel, the good news, the whole story of Jesus as our Savior. So that's my time for today. I do have another appointment that I need to run off to. So I am going to say farewell for now. Hope you will see me on Sunday. Again, we'll be back in church on March 7th. We have a number of options for Ash Wednesday, next Wednesday. Again, you can contact the church here, 652-6700. You can email me, revjperson@gmail.com, or email the church office, St. Mark's Harrisburg @gmail.com, and we will do our best to answer any questions or meet any needs you might have. Let's close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen. Thank you very much, and I will speak to you again on Sunday.